This next group has been focusing on energy in New York State, and will provide you with an interesting example of a program at the state level.
Good morning, everybody. Get this right. All right. Well, good morning. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Lee Hager, and on behalf of our managers, Stephanie and Tavo, and the rest of our group, it's my pleasure to present to you our assessment of the New York State Clean Energy Tech Production Program. So, over the course of the next few minutes, I'm hoping to help you all answer the following questions. First, what's the problem that we are trying to address? How does our bill address this issue? And then, if our bill is passed, how will we implement it? So first, what's the problem? Well, all of our legislation has touched on a variety of different topics and issues, but they're united by a common theme, that of climate change. Now, climate change is a global issue, but it's also felt very much at the local scale. In 2012, the northeastern coast was hit by Hurricane Sandy and experienced untold damages. New York specifically experienced over $19 billion worth of damages and losses alone. And as climate change continues to get worse and sea level rise continues, it's projected that over $8.5 billion worth of residential properties will be inundated chronically, with the potential for there to be $98 billion worth of residential properties being chronically inundated by the end of the century. So obviously, this is a big problem. Now, how is New York actually contributing to this issue? Primarily through its consumption of fossil fuels. So burning fossil fuels has two primary impacts. First, it leads to the emission of greenhouse gases, primarily carbon dioxide. But it also leads to the emission of nitrogen and sulfur oxides, which can create problems locally through particulate matter creation and ozone formation. So where does New York rank relative to other states in terms of its energy consumption? Well, it ranks 9th out of 50 states in 2015 when it overall emitted about 168 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. If you look at the two graphics at the bottom, you can see the breakdown of New York energy consumption by source, with over 75% of it coming from fossil fuels, 73%, excuse me, and a primary share of that also coming from natural gas. However, New York takes this problem very seriously. That's why, in wake of Hurricane Sandy, Governor Cuomo announced the Reforming the Energy Vision Initiative. Now, this is a broad-reaching progressive campaign program, but its primary goal is to transform the grid, and overall, it has an ambitious goal of reducing reducing carbon emissions 80% by 2050. So why is this bill necessary if New York's already doing so much on this issue? Well, as it stands, all electricity users pay what are called clean energy surcharges on their energy bills. Now, the revenues from this are split between two things: the utilities, and if you see on the bottom left, as well as NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Now, this is great, but most of these programs and initiatives are actually directed at residential consumers. If you look at the bottom right, one of these key platforms underneath the NYSERDA is the New York Green Bank. And overall, it's about 75% of its funds are directed at residential consumers. Now, if New York's going to meet its goal of 80% by 2050, they need to be ambitious and make sure that large energy users are also part of the solution. And that's why we have the Clean Energy Tech Production Program. So this program would allow large energy users to use their clean energy surcharges from their bills and put them towards eligible projects for energy efficiency and renewable energy generation capacity, rather than paying into statewide programs. Now, these large energy users are found everywhere. We're actually in one right now. And there are some others down the block, like Mount Sinai. There's also large data centers and manufacturers found throughout the state. What are the goals of this program? Well, overall, to lower the energy consumption from these large energy users through energy efficiency measures. However, we also want to increase renewable energy generation capacity. And through these two singular driving visions, we're hoping to overall lower the amount of pollutants and carbon emissions and do New York's part in addressing the issue of climate change. So what's the bill's status? Well, it was introduced by Assemblywoman Carrie Warner into the State Assembly, and a version of the bill has actually passed the State Senate. However, the legislative session has ended for the year, and if this bill is going to ultimately pass the State Assembly and be signed by Governor Cuomo, it'll need to be a priority on the floor in the coming year. So for the remainder of my presentation, I'm going to talk about this bill as if it was passed and would be implemented starting in January of 2019. So what's our design? Well, we wanted to have a buy-in from both the government as well as large energy users. So we needed to maximize themes of flexibility and transparency. We decided to prioritize performance guidelines rather than prescriptive measures, because this says that companies can say, instead of installing a specific amount of solar panels, be able to reflect their impact through the amount of dollars spent versus the amount of kilowatts that they've ultimately reduced. We also decided to give companies flexible access to their energy savings accounts rather than have a rebate method, because instead of having to basically spend money that could otherwise go towards other projects, they would be able to have access to the money directly and not have to go through a lot of bureaucracy through a rebate method. We also wanted to make sure that the government had buy-in, though, so we decided to outline some standards by which they will measure through third-party verification as well as our on-site auditors. So we ultimately decided that we needed to make 5 hires to get this program underway, with 3 of them being housed under the Public Service Commission and 2 being housed under NYSERDA. The hires in question would be the program director, our on-site auditor, application analyst, public relations specialist, and data analyst, who will perform a variety of roles that I will get into now. So first, what are the program objectives, really? It's broken down into 3 phases. We have the opt-in, the implementation phase, and reporting, in which we want to get large users to join our program. We want to be able to approve whatever projects they present to us, and then ultimately we want to be able to report on how impactful these projects were and be able to communicate them for future years to come. So in terms of the outcomes, this means we want a lot of people to participate in this program. We want to be able to implement as many of these energy efficiency and renewable energy generation projects as possible, and we want to make sure that we consistently provide good feedback for all the companies that participate. How will this be achieved? Well, through the variety of staff that we outlined previously, we want to make sure that we have public outreach so that we can explain to companies what they are buying into in terms of how they can access their money and ultimately what benefit they're going to get from participating in this program. We then also want to be able to review all of their applications as they put them forward once their energy savings funds have been established. And ultimately, we want to be able to assess their performance, report back to them, and provide feedback on areas in which they can improve going forward. So based on our projected hires and the overall services we're trying to provide, we came up with some administrative cost estimates. Now, they're relatively consistent. However, you might note that in several categories, such as on-site auditing, that they increase substantially in successive years. This is because we're expecting more large energy users to buy into the program as the years go on. So we want to make sure that more funds are available for these on-site audits as well as continued public relations outreach. However, the consistent budget is a big sell for us, so we wanted to make sure that overall, on an annual basis, the numbers were relatively consistent. Now, our timeline for implementation is focused around the big key aspects of what our program is trying to do. First and foremost, we're going to need to get staff hired, at which point we'll then be able to start communicating with these large energy users to try and get them to buy into the program, help set up their energy savings funds, and then as the year progresses, approve their projects before we begin collecting data from them at the end of the year to compile an end-of-year report and provide any additional feedback that's necessary. Now, how are we going to measure success? Well, it's broken down primarily into our process, outputs, and outcomes. The process being engaging with these large energy users, hopefully successfully getting them to join and stay on. The outputs being the amount of money that they're investing, as well as the number of projects that they're putting forward. And then for the outcome, ultimately how much kilowatt hours we're able to offset and the number of metric tons of greenhouse gas that we're able to reduce. So coming back to our big key questions. What is the problem that we're trying to address? Well, generating electricity from the consumption of fossil fuels results in the emission of carbon dioxides and other pollutants. What's the problem and how are we trying to fix it with this bill? Well, this clean energy tech production program would incentivize large energy users to come to the table and be part of the solution, allowing them to implement energy efficiency and renewable generation capacity projects. And lastly, how will we implement this bill? Well, if we pass it, we want to make sure that we measure our success based on large user participation, the level of project investment driven by the program, and ultimately, how much greenhouse gases are reduced. I want to thank you all for being here today, particularly Dr. Cohen, whose advice has been invaluable throughout this whole process, and I will now take any questions. Thank you so much.
Really well done.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I was just curious, how likely do you think the bill is to actually pass, and has there been any opposition to it?
So actually, New York's kind of, this bill is a unique one in that renewable energy generation and energy efficiency measures are actually pretty much a bipartisan supported issue. It has strong support within the state, and considering that Assemblywoman Carrie Warner was just reelected, I think that there's a very good chance that this gets passed, but it does need to be a priority in terms of what they're trying to do. And given that Governor Cuomo has made energy efficiency and renewable generation capacity such a top priority, I feel optimistic.
Be young and optimistic.
Exactly.
Other questions? Okay.
All right.
I guess we've achieved perfect understanding.
Exactly. Thank you all so much.